Hey, flock and friends. Welcome to episode 3 of the Write That Crochet Pattern podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to finish up our discussion on crochet industry standards. Honestly, I could probably record 3 or 4 more episodes on this topic, but I'm afraid if I nerd out too deep, I might lose your attention. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Cherie Mellick. I am the crochet tech editor behind Sweetbird Crochet. As a crochet tech editor, I specialize in helping designers publish patterns that are not only accurate, but also clear, polished, and easy to follow. My mission is to empower crochet designers through education and mentorship so they can design and write patterns with excellence. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. You know the drill. Go ahead and grab your latest project, your favorite drink, and listen in as you crochet. In episode 2, I laid the foundation of industry standards and I shared why we have standards in crochet. I shared with you about the Craft Yarn Council, how they were formed, and who makes up that trade council. I also talked about yarn standards, hook standards, and abbreviations. And then today, we're going to cover the final 3 standards: project levels, gauge, and repeats. I would also love to cover sizing standards, but I think that discussion is going to deserve an entire episode or 2. We'll see. Let's first talk about project levels. Some designers call them pattern levels, others refer to them as skill levels, and it really doesn't matter the terminology that you use. What matters most is the information that you list beneath that heading. A common concern many designers have when they submit their pattern to me for tech editing is whether they have their project labeled with the correct level. So when I first ventured into designing and writing crochet patterns, I totally dealt with that same concern. I made the mistake of thinking that the skill level that was listed on my crochet pattern was a direct representation of my own ability as a crocheter. I assumed that if my pattern was labeled as easy, I'm making air quotes here, it meant that I didn't know how to crochet very well, like I was just a beginner. Who wants to buy a crochet pattern from a beginner, right? When I began to learn about and understand industry standards, specifically for listing crochet projects, I quickly realized that these classifications were not a reflection of my personal abilities or my expertise as a crocheter. Instead, they served as a guideline to help my customers know what they were getting themselves into when they purchased my pattern. There are 4 standard project levels a crochet pattern can fall into. When you write your crochet pattern, I highly recommend using one of these 4 standards. I'm going to go over the 4 levels and what their definitions are first, and then I'm going to share with you how you can determine which one your pattern falls into. The first level is basic. These will be projects that use basic crochet stitches and could also include basic increases and decreases. The second level is easy. These are going to be projects that include simple stitch patterns, simple color work, and or simple shaping. The third level is intermediate, and these are going to include projects that have more involved stitch patterns, more difficult color work, and or more involved shaping. And then the fourth and last level is complex. These will include projects that have complex stitch patterns, intricate color work, and or complicated shaping using a variety of techniques and stitches simultaneously. So these levels, they offer clear and concise explanations, but a lot of designers find that their patterns don't fit neatly into any one level, or that it falls kind of in a in between of a level. And then some designers are not exactly sure how to determine which level their pattern is. So here's some food for thought when determining which level your pattern falls under. So your crochet pattern will fall into the basic project level if 1, you only use a basic stitch throughout your design. So that would include slip stitch, single crochet, half double crochet, and even a treble crochet, but no combination of any stitches. So it would have to only be 1 stitch throughout your entire pattern. And then 2, your design shouldn't include any color changes. Your project is going to be 1 color. And then 3, your design only uses basic increases and decreases. Next, your crochet project is going to fall into the easy project level if 1, you use a basic stitch combination throughout your design, or 2, you use front and back post stitches. 3, you use color work in your project. This color change can occur in a new row or round, or even within the same row or round. And then 4, you use more increases and decreases to create some type of shaping in your fabric. Then your crochet project will fall into the intermediate project level if 1, you use more than just the basic stitches in your design. So these stitches include, but aren't limited to, Tunisian crochet, bobble stitches, popcorn stitches, waffle stitches, back or front loops, herringbone stitch, crocodile stitch, iris stitch, and the list can go on and on and on. And then 2, you use crochet techniques like large clusters, multiple increases and decreases across a row or round, and then numerous different stitch patterns. And then 3, you use a lot of color work in your fabric to create a design or an image. Last but not least, your crochet project is going to fall into the complex project level if 1, you use complex stitches in your design. Complicated stitches include lover's knot, diamond waffle stitch, star stitch, interlocking zigzags, cross stitches, Celtic weave, feather and fan stitches, cable work, floating stitches, and so forth and so on. And then also 2, you use complex crochet techniques like filet crochet, bead crochet, intermeshing, or even crow tatting. And 3, you use an assembly of multiple pieces. So examples would be garments and more involved amigurumi patterns. I hope that information was helpful. Of course, if you're still not sure, let your tech editor know, and then they can help you determine what level to list. Okay, next we're going to get into industry standards for repeats. Honestly, writing repeats in a crochet pattern can be super confusing, but using repeats totally simplifies your instructions and makes them so much easier to read and follow. Could you imagine if you wrote out the entire line of instruction that used a single crochet, double crochet repeat? It would read something like this. Row 3. Single crochet in the first stitch, double in the next stitch, single in the next stitch, double in the next stitch, single in the next stitch, double in the next stitch, single in the next stitch, double in the next stitch. Put beats to this and we've got a crochet wrap. It really would be incredibly hard to follow that line of instruction. And most of your readers would totally give up on your pattern before they even started crocheting. So using standard repeats is going to solve the confusion and make your pattern just so much more enjoyable to consume. Crochet patterns have 2 primary type of repeats. There's stitch repeats and row repeats. Stitch repeats take place within a single line of instruction, while row repeats involve repeating one or several rows for a specific number of rows. Row or round repeats literally means to repeat the entire row or entire round of crochet instructions again. And depending on the pattern, this row or round repeat may mean to repeat the same row or round multiple times, or it might mean to repeat several rows or rounds over and over again. And stitch repeats are when a certain number of stitches are repeated within one line of instruction. How you use stitch repeats in your pattern will all depend on the complexity of your repeats. Some repeats can be super simple, while others are going to look more like complex math equations. When writing stitch repeats, you may need to use different repeat punctuations to show the beginning and the end of each repeat. The punctuation you use is going to vary depending on the type of repeat that you want to write. So let me clarify what repeat punctuations are. Repeat punctuations are used in the place of repeated line of instructions. So these punctuations, they can be accessed on your keyboard. There are 5 different punctuations you can use to indicate stitch repeats. The asterisk, the little star, the double asterisk, curly brackets, square brackets, and parentheses. So the single asterisk is the simplest of all repeat punctuations. And you would think that its use is pretty straightforward, right? Well, no ma'am, it is not. If a designer is not familiar with how to incorporate this tiny little star into their written pattern properly, it's going to throw off the entire design. So at its core, the asterisk serves as a warning flag. It signals the beginning of a repeat in one line of instruction. It's sort of like shorthand, helping you to condense instructions and reduce the clutter in your pattern. So when the asterisk is used effectively, it can enhance the readability and comprehension of your pattern and is going to help your readers navigate your repeats very easily. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to refer to all instructions as rows, but the same rules are going to apply when you write your patterns in rounds. Here's a little nerdy information for you. Did you know the word asterisk in Greek means little star, and it's often used as a multiplication symbol in calculators and spreadsheets. So keeping that in mind, using it for repeat sequences in a crochet pattern is very fitting. We place that little star anywhere that we want our stitches to multiply across our row. To use this little star repeat punctuation in your crochet pattern, you're going to hold the Shift key on your keyboard and press the number 8. And if your laptop or desktop keyboard has a numeric pad, you can also find that little star has its own button right above the number 9. I know you're looking at your keyboard right now. Okay, so when should you use one asterisk? Only use one asterisk in your line of instructions to indicate the beginning of your repeat sequence. And make sure you're using a limited number of stitches that repeat only once. So for example, you have chain 1, single crochet in the first stitch, and then you have your asterisk, and here's your repeat. Chain 1, skip 1, single crochet 1, and then you're going to repeat from the asterisk across your row. I would love to give you examples for each repeat punctuation in this podcast, but it's going to get way too complicated since I can't actually show you my examples. However, I have written a series of blog posts covering each repeat punctuation, how to use them in your pattern, and I give tons of examples for each one. You can find the links to the blog posts in the show notes by going to sweetbirdcrochet.com/industry standards part 2. That's the number 2. Or if you're listening on YouTube, I'm going to link all the blog posts in the description box. Okay, back to the single asterisk. When your repeat sequence is repeated to the end of your row, you can list your ending instructions in several ways. So here's a few examples. Repeat from asterisk to end, repeat from asterisk across, repeat from asterisk around. If your repeat sequence is interrupted at the end of a row, you can still use the single asterisk for your instructions. The only thing that's going to change is how you word your ending instructions. So for example, you have chain 1, single crochet 3, and then here you're going to start your repeat sequence. There's the asterisk, then we're going to chain 2, skip the next stitch, single in the next stitch. That's the end of your repeat sequence. Then you're going to say repeat from the asterisk to the last 3 stitches, and then single crochet 1 in each of the last 3. So when your repeat sequence is interrupted and not repeated to the end of your row, you're going to list your ending instructions in different ways. So here's a few examples. Repeat from asterisk until X stitches remain. Repeat from asterisk until the last X stitches. Repeat from asterisk X more times. And the one thing I don't want you to forget about is the semicolon. So the semicolon is like the superhero of sentence structure. It saves your writing from looking and sounding choppy, and it masks those transitions. So this superhero connects 2 independent clauses that are closely related to each other. For example, I love crochet, semicolon, it's my favorite craft. The 2 clauses could be separate sentences, but the sentence flow would get interrupted. So the semicolon shows that there's a break in what's being said, but it makes that transition just flow smoothly. And the semicolon works the same way when you're writing your crochet repeats. It indicates that there's a break or an interruption in the flow of instruction, but makes the transition flawless. So using the semicolon at the end of your repeat sequence will always indicate that a shift is about to happen and is going to help the structure of your sentence transition smoothly. Always, always, always use the power of the semicolon at the end of your repeats. For example, chain 1, single crochet 3, here's your repeat sequence, asterisk, chain 2, skip the next stitch, single in the next stitch, and that's the end of your repeat sequence. So you're going to put the semicolon there and then say repeat from asterisk to the last 3 stitches. And of course, I have all these examples in detail on my blog posts. Okay, so when to use 2 asterisks. Double asterisks are often used when a pretty long repeat occurs in your line of instruction. However, the last sequence repeated won't be a complete repeat. So the double asterisks indicate that a repeat sequence is going to stop. And this is going to be better understood in the blog post because I'll walk you through it step by step. Like, it honestly can get super complicated if I try to verbally tell you without you being able to see what I'm talking about. So please go check out those blog posts. So when should you not use asterisks at all? So don't use them if no groups of stitches repeat in your line of instruction. So that seems obvious, right? But it's a bit more complicated than that. Sometimes designers can confuse their line of instructions for repeats. And if you look at instructions for an amigurumi doll, it might read asterisk, increase, asterisk, repeat from asterisk to asterisk. That was really hard to say. Okay, so yes, they are repeating increases all the way around their work, but this is not a stitch repeat that requires that little star. It would be better just to write out increase in each stitch around. So the same goes for lines of instructions that are simple enough not to use repeat punctuations like double crochet in each stitch across. Next, we're going to talk about parentheses, braces, and brackets. Using these may feel a bit more complicated than the standard asterisk, but I promise you that once you understand how each of these punctuations operate, you'll be properly using them in your patterns without any issues. Since crochet patterns are really just a fun form of math equations, it makes perfect sense for designers to use these repeat punctuations. In mathematics, the symbols, parentheses, curly brackets, and square brackets are all called brackets. So these brackets are used to group numbers and operations to bring clarity to a sequence of actions that need to be performed. So brackets indicate that what is enclosed within them have a higher priority. And something to keep in mind, whether you're working on math equation or writing a crochet pattern, brackets always come in pairs. There has to be an opening bracket to indicate the beginning of the term and a closing bracket to indicate the ending. So let's discuss each bracket type and how to use them in your crochet pattern. The first is parentheses or round brackets. So in English grammar, parentheses can be used in a sentence to provide additional information or to separate a phrase from the rest of the sentence. And then in math, parentheses are used to group numbers and operations together, helping us to understand what needs to be done to complete the calculation. Using parentheses in a crochet pattern is similar to how they are used in both grammar and math equations. Again, here's a little more nerdy information for you. Did you know that the word parentheses in Greek means a putting in beside? So this makes perfect sense when you understand how parentheses work in a crochet pattern. So to use this repeat punctuation in your crochet pattern, just hold the Shift key or the Control on a Mac. I don't have a Mac, so I'm not sure exactly how that works. But if you have a Windows, it's hold the Shift key and press the number 9 for the left or opening parentheses, and the Shift key and number 0 for the right or closing parentheses. You can also hold the Alt key and type 0040 for the left parentheses and 0041 for the right parentheses. Okay, parentheses are most commonly used to group stitches that should be worked together. The Craft Yarn Council describes parentheses as working instructions within parentheses as many times as directed, or working a group of stitches all in the same stitch or space. So when working multiple stitches all in the same stitch or space, you're only going to use parentheses. You don't use any other repeat punctuations like the square brackets or an asterisk. Okay, so boxed or curly brackets. In English grammar, boxed brackets provide added explanations, corrections, or comments on quoted material in a sentence. Curly brackets, also known as braces, group certain words or sentences together. In math, square brackets are used for more complex grouping of numbers and operations, while curly brackets represent sets. So using brackets in crochet patterns is similar to math, the square and curly brackets. However, curly brackets and boxed brackets, they're used in the same manner in crochet. Okay, so how to type these brackets on your keyboard. Here's a little nerdy history for you. The first bracket to appear in written English was the chevron, and square brackets made an appearance with some teleprinters back in the 20s. Curly brackets were not used until the 1960s when the IBM 7030 stretch was released. I know, I'm a total nerd. So to use boxed brackets, you're going to locate the keys that are to the right of the letter P on your keyboard. Press either the open bracket or the closed bracket key. Alternatively, you can hold down the Alt key and type 91 for the left boxed bracket and 93 for the right boxed bracket. And then if you want to use the curly brackets, hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and press either the open or close curly bracket key that's also located to the right of the letter P. You can also hold down the Alt key and type 123 for the left curly bracket and 125 for the right curly bracket. These brackets are most commonly used within a line of instruction to repeat stitches a particular number of times. So the Craft Yarn Council describes these brackets as work instructions within brackets as many times as directed. So it's important to note that when indicating how many times your reader should work the stitches within the brackets, you shouldn't use the term repeat. This is because technically they're not repeating anything. When the reader encounters the brackets, they should not complete what is within them until you give them specific instructions. You should tell them exactly what to do with the stitches inside the brackets. For example, you have a boxed bracket opening, double crochet in the next 3 stitches, single in the next 5 stitches. So those line of instructions are within boxed brackets. And at the end, it says 6 times. So you want them to work those contained stitches a total of 6 times. The only time you ever use repeat X amount of times is when you're using the asterisk. Curly brackets, or also called braces, are used in a similar way as square brackets. They can replace square brackets in a line of instructions, or they can be combined with the square brackets and parentheses to create repeats within repeats. Please check out the show notes for the repeat series that I wrote on my blog to see examples of how to use each one of these repeats. It will be worth your time. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about in today's episode is standard gauge in crochet. So gauge is an instrument to take certain measurements according to industry standards. And gauge doesn't only apply to the fiber world, it also applies to a wide range of things. Let's take wire, for example. All wires have a gauge, and when measuring wire, you're measuring its diameter. This measurement determines the amount of electrical current it can safely carry. So these standards were established for the safety of electricians. Another example is the railway system. So in the railway system, there's a thing called track gauge. This measures the distance between 2 rails of a track. Again, there's a standard system of gauges, and for the railway, there's various gauges. So all trains need to have wheel sets that match the gauge of the rails. If they don't match gauge, they can't travel on that track. In the crochet world, there is also standards. So the standard gauge measurement is typically a 4-inch, 10-centimeter square using a particular yarn and hook size. So the instrument that we use to measure gauge is called a gauge swatch. There are two parts to measuring gauge. There's stitch gauge and there's row gauge. The stitch gauge is the number of stitches across 4 inches of fabric, and the row gauge is the number of rows within 4 inches of fabric. So when creating a gauge swatch, I always recommend making your sample bigger than the standard 4 inches. The reason for this is that the edges of crochet pieces can be kind of wonky, and it's not going to give you an accurate measurement of your true gauge. So when I create a gauge swatch, I always make my fabric piece at least 6 inches, 15 centimeters square, so I can measure the middle area, which is going to be my true gauge. Now, let me clarify something that many crocheters and knitters too get confused about. Gauge and tension are not the same. So gauge, as explained already, is the instrument used to take measurements. Tension is how loose or tight the yarn is when you crochet. So gauge measures your tension, and your tension is going to affect gauge. When someone says, I hit gauge or I obtained gauge, it means that they were able to crochet the right number of stitches in rows per the standard 4-inch, 10-centimeter measurement. You can never fix gauge because gauge is a standard truth. However, you can fix your tension to match gauge. Gauge is a vital step in the design process. It doesn't matter if you design amigurumi or if you design garments. Knowing the number of stitches and rows within the standard gauge measurement will help you determine several things. One, your starting stitches, the number of stitches that are needed to start your project and determine its width. Two, your row or round count. That's the number of rows or round needed to complete your project to determine its length. Three, how much yarn you're going to need. Working some basic numbers from your swatch is going to help you get the exact yardage needed for your design. That means no more wasted money or yarn. Four, grading. If your design calls for multiple sizes, these numbers are going to be a key factor in scaling your design to either a larger size or smaller size. Five, it's going to be a blueprint for your tech editor. Your editor is going to use these numbers to ensure that all your stitch counts and row counts are accurate and precise. Six, it adapts your pattern. With these numbers, you can modify your pattern using various yarns and hooks while maintaining the integrity of your design. And then last, number 7, communicate clearly. Providing gauge details in your pattern helps crocheters make informed decisions about yarn and hook sizes, and it's going to reduce confusion and possible errors. Who knew that this little piece of fabric could be so magical? Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. I know this was a lot of information. Don't forget to check out the blog post mentioned in this episode and tune into my YouTube channel next week because we're going to dive a little deeper into gauge swatches. I'm going to show you how to properly list them in your patterns and how to work them up in rows and in round. And we're also going to discuss how to list them for amigurumi and what that looks like. If you're new here, please take a minute to subscribe, leave a review or a rating. I would love to hear from you. I enjoy sharing the knowledge I've gained over the years about designing and writing crochet patterns with you. Until next time, guys, write that crochet pattern